All right, hello everybody. My name is Alan, and I'm joined today by dreadful Rick Contreras. We are going to review the new album from Messa. This Italian band is releasing their fourth album, and it is coming out on April 11th via Metal Blade Records.
Forged by fire, lightning splendor, all meaningless, falling ember.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Rick and I have a pretty cool album to talk to you about tonight from an unusual band called Messa, which is Italian for the word mass. Their album, The Spin, is coming out. It's their debut for Metal Blade Records, and it's a pretty interesting band and a pretty interesting album. It's a group that Rick has been following for quite a while. So, Rick, would you like to kind of catch people up a little bit on who Mesa is in
Yeah.
case folks are not familiar with them?
They're finally making headway. I first caught them live on their first US tour in 2023. And I already knew even then this band had a lot of potential.
Hmm.
They started in 2014, put out their debut in 2016 with Belfry, and they were dubbed as a doom metal band. But
Hmm.
they're a lot more than that, as we're
Yeah,
going to talk about. And they even started to incorporate a new, I guess, sub-genre, I guess, name for this. Because what do you call this when you start incorporating all these different styles and instruments and whatnot? You're moving away from what we traditionally think of something as doom metal. They are a little more eclectic than that with the stuff that they incorporate.
very much so, yes.
As you know, Alan, their last album, Close, which was on Smart Records,
Hmm.
and that was my album of the year. Uh,
Yeah, yep. It was a good album, and yeah, you had that one at the top of your list.
it was their longest album. It was definitely over an hour, and they went kind of in that very spiritual direction with that sound. They still had a lot of that fuzz in their guitar, which I think kind of helps with that, with the doom side of it, but with a lot of the ambience. And there were still heavy moments, with there, and they still haven't lost that, but there's more to their sound. And I think being new to Metal Blade, they kind of it's like a new fresh coat that they're adding, because where do you go from there, right? They don't make the same album twice,
No, they really don't. And that's a great point. This band on the debut, they had a very, sort of, doomy, fuzzy sound. It was pretty natural to call them like, a doom band leaning into the stoner kind of guitar tone on the debut album, The Belfry. But they left that behind as a major component of the music by the time the second album came out. And like you said, they still use it here and there. It's kind of strategic, but they drifted away from that very quickly. If anybody's only heard the Belfry and is now coming kind of back on board to hear the band again, it's going to sound very, very different for sure. They have sort of drifted, out there towards the edges of heavy metal. And while the doom tag still applies, they have a laundry list of tags they apply. If you look at, any of their social media stuff, they'll tag it as doom, but they'll also tag it as drone, stoner, ambient, dark, um, blues, jazz. The list kind of just goes on, and all of those tags are relevant, for different parts of different songs, for sure. But it does make for a really unique and kind of strange combination that is going to be really interesting for some folks, but for other folks, it may veer a little bit too far away from traditional doom, and maybe a little bit too far from traditional metal. What do you think? Have they kind of crossed a boundary into out
I
of metal,
believe
or?
so. You know what was the big tell on their second album, Feast for Water? Just looking at that cover, it kind of
Mhm.
it looks like a Blue Note record. They went for that jazz looking aesthetic
It
right off.
really does. You're right. Yeah, I remember seeing it for the first time and wondering if it was the same band, if it was some other group called Mesa.
They still had their old logo, but very tiny, kind of in a corner somewhere. Uh,
Hmm.
it said Mesa, in kind of like kind of a more of a traditional font. When you compare that to Belfry, it's like completely night and day.
Yep.
And you can tell this is a band that's looking to evolve a certain kind of way. And even then, back in 2018, I knew, all right, they're not going to try and do the same thing twice. It's just a band I wanted to follow. I'm glad I did. And I'm glad that you know, this is something that kind of helps me kind of edge me in to what they're trying to do. They're very creative. If you watch
Hmm.
any of their videos, it's very artsy in a
Yep.
kind of way, which is cool. but I don't think it's off-putting. They don't come off as pretentious or anything like
No.
that. But
Mm-mm.
the way we were describing it, one I guess can see how that could sound that way.
Good
But
point. Yeah.
they really are evolving and doing their own thing. And the musicianship is also, I notice, is just noticeably better, in a lot of other ways, which
Hmm.
allows them to sort of grow and craft kind of what they're trying to sound like. But they're not moving beyond the limits of what they can do. And that can tell, even with the production work that's done on there, you strip that away and just listen to the melody and the way they just put together a composition. This is a band that's trying different things, but not stretching beyond the means at the time of what they're able to do.
No, I'd agree with all of that for sure. And yeah, they're obviously drawing in a lot of different influences, but finding a way to, mix them pretty smoothly throughout their career, which is really impressive. They're led by a very impressive vocalist. Sarah's got an amazing voice that fits the music very well. She does not fall into the sometimes, overused style of female vocalists where they focus very heavily on kind of, the somewhat spooky or ominous sounding 70s occult rock, vibes that you would get from something like early Jefferson Airplane. Um, Sarah's voice has all of that kind of, wistful longing and sadness to it, but it can also have a much brighter sound than that. And yeah, I think, she's a magnificent singer and pretty unique, which goes really nicely with the kind of music they're trying to craft and doing a
Quite
really good job with.
quite ethereal, the way she's able to handle it. She's not somebody I would say has an extreme wide octave range, but she
Right.
works really well with the range she can pull. Uh,
Hmm.
and I think with the way they handle the production, and it really caters to the way she's able to put in the effort and make it sound really good. Again, within the scope of how she's able to perform. And
Agreed.
she can, because I've seen them live.
Oh, my monster, ready to feed.
Well, with this new album, there's more focus on lead guitar work. There's more solo work on this. I believe Alberto was his name. And it's just, there are still some very crunchy, riffy moments, but not as
Hmm.
frequent as it was with their past material. Here, I feel like there's more leanings towards the atmosphere and just letting things kind of ring out a little more. They've always had that sense of ambience to them.
Yes. Mhm.
That's still not lost. But I feel like with this album, they're looking, and like I said earlier, with Close, it was a more of a spiritual sounding album. It kind
Mhm.
of took you in that place, and that was very intentional to their theme. This time around, they have a bit of a post-punk, a little bit of that dark wave elements with a bit of
Yes.
the flange, delay, whatever you call it, however they're doing it. But it kind of reminds me of the kind of stuff like Sisters of Mercy does in those days,
Hmm.
but without sounding gothy. You know,
That's a really good point. Yeah, they don't cross the line into, Gothic territory, but they are borrowing a little bit from that kind of, Joy Division or Sisters of Mercy atmosphere. Not trying to sound like them, but definitely tapping into that overall ambience. That's a really good point.
it's very reminiscent to that era. If anybody who remembers that when that was like a common sound uh,
Hmm.
time, and I feel like this is very intentional for them to want to visit that period as part of their production. I feel like the only downside to that is with Sarah's vocals. I feel like sometimes the effects can sometimes a little overpower what she's singing. So it's
Hmm.
sometimes the particular words are lost. It's like she's saying something, but I have to listen a little harder because the effects that are kind of layered over it can be
Yes.
overpowering.
I'm glad you
And
pointed that out. I noticed that too at times. Yep.
it's not the whole album.
Hmm.
It's kind of caked over the album, but it's stronger on the first two tracks. I've
Hmm.
noticed, and they kind of quickly move away from that into, once they get on to the other songs. But the way they space out the tracks, I think, as far as from a musicality standpoint and production, I think the song order fits really well. It's just 6 tracks. It's a shorter album than Close. It's not as grandiose in that kind of way.
Hmm.
I think there's the longest track is a little over 8 minutes. They don't
Yeah.
go longer than that. So averaging 4 minutes up to 6 minutes, more or less. So it's a very easy get in, get out kind of album.
Yeah, it is. And I agree with you. I like the way it's structured. It comes in at about 41, 42 minutes total, somewhere in that neighborhood. And yeah, there's a couple of 8-minute tracks, but they kind of put those towards the back of the album. So they let you work through several songs more in that 4 to 5 minute range before, giving you the kind of the longer epic ones. And yeah, I can agree with you too. Now, this album is one that doesn't necessarily come out of the gates swinging. The opening track, Void Meridian, I think it's a nice enough track. It kind of sets up the table. It shows you what they're going to be doing in general for the album. For me, it's not one of the more memorable tracks on the album, though. But they quickly, kind of, move to stronger numbers with number two at Races, and then track three, Fire on the Roof, which is the first time you hear them break out one of their heavier riffs. And when they use those heavy riffs, they really do sound quite good. They add a lot of impact to that kind of song.
It's where I belong.
You were talking about Void Meridian and how it may not have been the most memorable track coming in. I'm almost thinking because if you're coming off from Close and you pick up from the last track from Close and go right into this album, I feel like it's a nice segue uh,
Okay.
from that. It's a more ethereal. She's got her voice is a little more sultry there, but right away you start to notice that kind of that the effects of that kind of the 80s kind of sound kind of thrown in there. But you
Hmm.
can still tell it's modern production, just reminiscent of that old kind of post-punk kind of aesthetic, if you will.
Mhm. Yes, and we've heard other bands doing that in recent years. One band that stood out as a comparison to me in terms of the sound was Canada's Spell. They use that same kind of, wanting to sound like that early to mid 80s jangly gothic, but still, with a kind of a commercial lean to it, kind of sound.
All my love feeling distant, but my will is specified. Can you smell the dead magnolia while the moon?
The thing about just kind of overall with the album, they have a way to kind of do the transitions. They kind of, and there's a slowdown period towards the middle, and there's this sort of epic solo moment towards the third quarter of of the track. It's
Yep.
sort of a template I noticed. There's a theme going on with this. The execution of the guitar work is just amazing. I
Yeah.
can tell the contrast between how he's grown and developed. Alberto, who does the that guitar work, is just there's more texture to it. There's just more. It's just very good execution. And then moving on to At Races, it's a faster moving song right off the bat.
Yep.
Uh, and that was, I think, that was their first single that they
Good
dropped
choice.
for this album. And another one that has a really good solo towards it. And it does kind of slow down. It doesn't stay at the same pace, which
Hmm.
it keeps you from you don't get bored. It
No.
moves pretty quickly. That's a 6 minute, I think it's exactly 6 minutes, that
Hmm.
song. Nice pace. I was worried because, not so much worried, but there was these speaking moments in the video. She kind of recites this kind of poem. This is poetry going on.
Okay.
And, before listening to these tracks, I was wondering if that was going to be incorporated into the album itself. It looks like that's just part of the video.
Mm.
So you're not
Yeah.
going to have speaking moments on this album.
Yeah,
So
it's not included in the promo at least.
that's why I say not so much worried. It was just kind of if you don't happen to like that part of that kind of thing in your music, you don't have to worry about it. It's not here. It's
Hmm.
just in the videos. And then moving on to Fire on the Roof, like you were talking about, it's a shorter track. It's about 4.5 minutes or so. And out of all the tracks here, I think that particular track moves really good. They're probably their heaviest song. The way, because it reminds me of there are moments in there that reminds me of the Belfry days.
Yes. Hmm.
Both if you get to the Belfry days on this album, it's that particular song. But I'm glad it wasn't their a first single that they dropped because it would have been very misled.
I agree. Yeah, it would not. It's a great song, but not the one to start advertising the album with.
Not
Because yeah, that
representative.
would set up some probably false expectations for some listeners.
It's a gym playlist track for me though. It just
Oh yeah, it's a great song for sure. Yeah. And after that, they kind of go from, arguably the heaviest track on the album to the softest with Immolation.
Yep.
And this is one where you used that word sultry earlier, and I really liked that for Sarah's style. Because this song, very much in my mind's eye, you're just watching her sing this like under a spotlight on a tiny stage in some kind of like, smoky, backroom bar, with all just put every bad noir stereotype into that mental picture, but put Sarah right there in the middle of the stage. And that's what this song sounds like. Very soft, easygoing song. She sounds beautiful on it. And it's just, tailor made for that kind of setting. This is where, again, more of the blues and jazz influence for the band starts to show through.
Immolation, everything that you said, I feel like it's a nice breaker for the kind of what I would call the middle of the album. By this
Hmm.
point, before you move on to the next track, Immolation, it's very nice melody. With a few repeated listens, it starts to get into your head. And I love the guitar solo, which kind of it plays like the melody as she's singing, at the same time. Kind of a little later into the track, it does kind of build up. It starts out really soft with
Hmm.
the piano and all that kind of incorporated in there, and a little bit of lounge room, I guess you could say, with the noir
Yeah.
element as you were describing. Very interesting. I think it's those moments where you start to kind of question, is this a metal band anymore? Where or
Hmm.
the Doom. It's they
Yep.
have those pockets where that label is not applied there. I think here you have this really kind of soft moments, which I think it's paced really well where it's at.
It is like a beautiful weight on my heart. Please run away, please. It is like a beautiful.
And then we move on to the what was their second single, The Dress.
And this is one of the 8-minute more epic numbers on the album. And you're right, we've kind of transitioned into the middle of the album here. So what are your thoughts on this big number?
When they and I knew this was already an evolving band, so I wasn't taken aback about the fact that they went this direction with this. But anybody seeing this for the first time, and I'm trying to describe this band, and if this is the first thing that you watch, you might be telling yourself, like, this band may be a little too eclectic or artsy for my taste.
This is the number that could, be a little bit of a turnoff to some folks.
Um, but I think this is also kind of a test of how well you're willing to allow yourself to open up to this kind of sound, as they
Yep.
call themselves Scarlet Doom. I think this particular track is the reason why they might apply that label, because
Hmm.
there's moments, and dare I say, trumpet.
Yes, you've got a horn solo in this song, which may sound a bit weird to folks, but Mesa has done this kind of thing before. On the Belfry, the debut album, there's a clarinet solo in one of the longer songs there. The second, or one of the two albums, you know better than I, one of them has a saxophone solo. I forget if it's Close or Feast on Water, but Mesa's not above, working in again more of that jazzy influence. You could say like they're taking a risk or a chance or something, but it doesn't feel like that. It feels like it fits into, the music just fine. They're drawing from their influences and they're
Well, that
finding a
made
way to make
us.
it work.
Also, if you hang around long enough with the song, and if the horns didn't scare you, and you're still there, it's followed by an amazing, probably my favorite solo in that whole
Hmm.
album. Is because if you like Pink Floyd and that the Gilmour-esque lead work of guitar playing, he kind of has those influences in there. And the way it kind of just leads into it, it feels so natural.
Yep.
It's because it kind of has this very lounge room kind of moment. It makes and I don't smoke cigarettes, but I listen to this, I wouldn't mind diving in, grabbing a
Yep.
couple of folks. It just gives you that vibe. There's a cool factor to this that
Yes.
I do like. And again, I'm glad it's there. It's a long song, but I think there's a reason for that. Once you understand what they're doing with the ringing and the textures, it's the build up, but it pays off.
Hmm.
If it didn't,
Yeah.
that would not be good. But in this case, it does.
Yeah. I don't think this would work as a 4-minute song. It would be too compacted and stuff wouldn't have room to, like you said, to kind of move very naturally from one part to another. And then yeah, after they kind of get you into like the comfort zone here with this song, they come back with the most aggressive song on the album, Reveal, which has like a almost like a little kind of quick blast beat pacing to and a much heavier riff to really kind of rattle you back. If you've drifted off, this one is going to make you refocus.
That's another one where they take a different kind of liberty, and this is something I don't think they've done before in their previous albums. It's kind of do the slide guitar
Mm,
element, which is for a metal band. It's not also something you hear bands do too often,
nope.
which is what I thought was very cool, especially a band coming from Italy. And so they quickly lead on to this sort of very frantic riff, which is heavy and really cool. And it's another one that kind of stays in your head. And we didn't talk about the drumming on this album. It's it's one of those cases where the drumming is so serviceable, you almost forget it's there, just
Hmm.
because the execution it's followed so smoothly. And I believe his name is Rocco, and the way he kind of just naturally does these fills and the
Hmm.
way everything kind of comes in. He's not trying to be flashy with this. I think he's just one of those guys that's been with the band for a particular period of time during their tenure, and he knows what their sound is. He knows how to maneuver with them, and I notice with Reveal and the way he kind of follows the riffs, it's in this particular case very appropriate,
Yes.
which I think really adds more power to the riffs and makes it adds to the heaviness
Hmm.
of how they do this. And then there's a part with the guitar solo, which is it's a slide guitar solo, along with it. How often do you hear that in
Hmm.
metal, especially a band who's supposed to be a doom metal band? It tells you this is not a typical kind of band to get into if you want a sense of convention, you
No,
know.
definitely not. Yeah.
So another example, I think with this track, very cool. And again, it took me a minute to process that. I'm like, is this slide guitar?
Yeah, this is a band that's not above using bits and pieces of different instrumentation here and there. So, and it's easy to overlook sometimes. But I think this is also the song where you hear Sarah kind of at her most ominous and powerful. Like you
Yeah.
said earlier, she doesn't have a ton of vertical range. She's not going up and down scales or octaves, but she knows when to deliver things kind of soft and gently, and she knows when to put some power into her voice. And this is one of those songs where she gets to crank up the power a little bit, and it adds a nice punch to that chorus for sure. And then the album is almost over at that point. We only have the closer, which is the second track that makes it over the 8 minute mark, which is called Thicker Blood. Would you like to walk us through that one, please, Rick?
Yeah, and it's a great ender actually.
Mhm.
I don't know when we're gonna get another album, but they ended on their longest track. I think it clocks in at 8 minutes and 45 seconds, almost 9 minutes.
Yep.
Which is not unusual for them as they've done in the past. But in this particular album, I think they're a little more experimental in a different kind of way. But if you're only going to listen to Thicker Blood, it kind of has elements of all the other tracks
Mhm.
incorporated all in that kind of 8, 9 minute segments within, which I think it's kind of a great way to end it. I wouldn't have thought of that, from a production standpoint. But interesting how they went about with that song. It has the heaviness. It's got the solos. It's got moments where her voice is, she's playing with these ideas that
Mhm.
she's been doing with the other tracks. And it's got some riffs in there. It's just a little bit of the fuzz still in there. It's not as apparent because of
Yep.
the effects thrown on top of it. But I do notice it. So kind of speaking from a vantage where if you're coming in as your first album, as your introduction to the band, this is them at a point where they're a little more effects laden, but not in a way that comes off as unnecessary. I think it's kind of a part of a texture that they're trying
Mhm.
to, just doing something different. And now that they're on Metal Blade, which I didn't mention earlier, was on the surface, I was surprised to hear they were signed to Metal Blade because they don't sound like a
Yep.
Metal Blade band.
They
Not
really don't. No.
so it's and I hope there's a lot of push to support for Metal Blade for this kind of act because I think it's an interesting addition to their roster of other bands that they have.
Yeah, I think it's a cool signing for them, and hopefully it will play out well. But yeah, and I kind of like your point about this closing song having elements of all the others. I think this track of all the songs on here gives you a picture of Mesa in a nutshell as much as is possible. Like if you needed to play one song from this album to try to give people an idea of what the band is all about, I think this is the one I would pick also. Because like you said, it shows a good range of all the types of things they've been doing across these other six songs.
Great closer. And towards the effect there, and again, it gets a little haunting. There's a part in there
Hmm.
which is pretty cool. Which I think it's something that should be familiar for a band who's known to do doom style. A little
Hmm.
bit of that kind of just element to kind of remind you that they're still capable of doing stuff in that kind of range. Uh,
Yes. Yeah, it's
so
still in their capability. It's one of the tools they have, but it's only one of many tools now.
yeah. It
Yeah.
kind of makes me curious. The band who does not put out the same album twice, and how they're going to grow from here on out. I guess we'll see. Unless they have already some stuff in the studio worked out, and we'll get another album, right off the bat, maybe another year or so. But I guess we'll wait and see.
We'll have to see. Yeah. And one thing that's I'm interested too, because you kind of talked about how the opening song on this one kind of tied back into the ending of the previous album, Close. The last few moments of this album are interesting because they actually bring in actually some very harsh, black metal style, kind of just tortured screams. I'm not sure if they're whispering something or just, going or
You don't
something.
hear her do too often with this.
No, they really don't. It's the only time on the album they do it, and it's just there for like the last, I don't know, maybe 30, 45 seconds or so. And the song is kind of just, gradually winding down, and all of a sudden, you have this element added at the end, and it makes for like kind of a disquieting type of ending to what's been, a gray kind of album with sadness and melancholy, but not wallowing in misery or anything.
Mhm.
And for him to bring up, this, change at the very end, where all of a sudden it's like, but wait, we're going out, kind of bearing our fangs a little bit. It's a little bit, of a surprise, and it does make me wonder, it's like, that's kind of cool, but yeah, where is that leading to something else? I don't know. It's again, it's not sudden. It doesn't come out of anywhere. It's not like a jump scare moment or something, but it definitely feels, it doesn't feel out of place. It's just very noticeable because it's the only time they did it. They saved it for the very end, and you figure that's got to be deliberate. It's not just placed there randomly.
I also want to make one more note about the bass. I don't think we covered yet.
We haven't, but we should.
He's named Marco, and I noticed that there's a little difference in tone from the last album. I
Hmm.
don't know if it's fuller, thicker. I'm not sure how to describe it, but I think smoother might be the word. You notice this in Void Meridian. It kind of opens up with that kind of repeating doon 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 doon,
Hmm.
starts to build up. For a band like this that has a sense of atmosphere, you do need kind of the tone of the bass really has a lot of importance to kind
Yes.
of incorporating that the fullness of that sound and to kind of help fill it out. There are moments I think that you if you're not really paying attention, but as doing a review, you're sort of forced to. And
Yep.
I've noticed how much fuller everything is with the way they incorporated the bass, and I just noticed a difference in tone from the last album. So there's something that Marco is doing with his rig to kind of adapt to this style that they're moving with in this direction. Like we talked about Fire on the Roof, and it has that sort of boom 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 boom. It almost has an 80s synth kind of Terminator
Almost, yeah. But
thing
like you
going
said, with
on.
like a modern production, it doesn't feel like a dated 80s production.
Yeah,
Hmm.
which and awesome album. It doesn't have the sense of the epicness the way Close did.
Agreed.
It's more of a sense of it's a sensibility of trying little different things, but it moves faster. It's not as
Hmm.
it's not as grandiose, but it has grandiose moments. That's just the way Mesa does their stuff.
Well said. Hmm.
I think they've developed as far as musicianship and vocal ability that now they're allowing themselves a little even more liberties with this. So I love this band. I followed them since the beginning, and it's just another great album. And it's cool that Metal Blade now has them on their roster.
Yeah, I agreed on all points. I think you got me into this band back, around when Belfry had come out, maybe right before the second album had come out. But yeah, I think it's a very solid album. It's got a lot of replayability to it. This is not an album that you play just a few times and put away and forget about. Again, standard for a review, I'm probably going to listen to something between 5 and 10 times, but this album's probably gotten more like, 15 to 20 plays already. And it's not one I'm tired of. It's not like, okay, finally, I can, wrap this up and not have to listen to this again. It's like, no, this will probably work its way back into my playlist off and on throughout the year.
It's in your head and it has a little bit of everything. Again, if you want something a little more drawn out of its atmospheric, go to the dress. You want something a little more of a draw as far as riffs, fire on the roof, maybe
Mhm.
even reveal.
Yeah, it does have, a little bit of everything. And again, sometimes that goes wrong, where bands are trying to incorporate too many things and the parts feel disjointed or something. That is not an issue here at all. Mesa's, blended things very nicely, very smoothly, and they do kind of have, their own sound and style at this point. And if they want to call it Scarlet Doom, um, we'll just add it to the list of subgenres that are out there, and it'll help, if nothing else, indicate that, yeah, this is a very
Well,
unique, very
one
cool
last
band and a good album.
one last important point. With Close, they've recorded their previous album all together kind of in the studio and they kind of worked in the same room. With this album, they worked separately
Oh,
and
didn't know that.
recorded in different locations. And I believe when I was reading the blurb, there was kind of their way of kind of being inspired with their own little ideas and kind of getting everybody to kind of share in with kind of what they were able to put together
Hmm.
and to put this album, get all the ideas kind of incorporated. And it's interesting because the results still speak for itself, with the
Hmm.
way everything's kind of divided, but still kind of works.
Yeah, it actually all came to, in that kind of situation, things might not always mesh very well, but here, yeah, it came together really seamlessly. So yeah, I think we're both fans of this. Yeah, my only caveat for this would be, for folks wanting to check it out, don't go in expecting, a flat out, Candlemas or Saint Vitus kind of Doom experience. That's not what the band's trying to do here. It's going to have its heavy moments, but this is, going across a broader musical spectrum. If you're a pure headbanger and don't want to listen to other things, this is probably not the band or album for you. But if you're interested in some of those other influences that Rick and I have talked about along the way throughout this review, then I would highly encourage folks to check out
I,
Mesa's
I would
new
even
album.
say for the jaded Doom listener, if you're kind of feeling a little tired with the stuff,
Yeah.
this is a band who's trying something different. They're making an effort, to kind of
Hmm.
incorporate stuff you don't traditionally get in this kind of style. You know.
Yes, no, for anyone who likes, dark, dreary music and doesn't want to just stick, to goth or just to doom, then yeah, Mace is the kind of band that could really appeal to you, because of all the different influences they've incorporated into some really awesome music. All right. Any last closing thought before we sign off, Rick? I think we both agree this is an awesome album for folks to check
Album,
out.
it's called The Spin, like you said, April 11th. It's on vinyl, CD. I think all the formats that Metal Blade, they got you covered.
That they do, for sure.
Got the Ouroboros thing, which I think is a sense of symbolism, right? I think it's left up to interpretation of what we might think that might mean. The way I'm interpreting it is that it's kind of coming back to the sensibilities of their previous albums, kind of incorporated here all in one, but also expanding to new things. But again, I don't know how you see it or how everybody else might see it, but that's the beauty of art.
Snakes are cool. That's how I saw it.
There we go.
That works too. All right. Well, Rick, thanks so much for inviting me to, yeah, review this one with you. I didn't know it was coming out right away, but you texted me a month or 6 weeks ago and was like, hey, we should review this together. And so like, oh, absolutely. So thanks to Metal Blade for circulating the promo so that we could hopefully help drum up some interest for it ahead of time. But that's going to do it for this particular album review. Thanks to folks for watching. Check out the other content here on Heavy Metallurgy. We try to review at least one album every week. And it's not always, the biggest, blockbuster releases, but we want to help you find bands like this one, the bands that have, something really cool and original to do that maybe, they're not quite on your radar yet. So check out other album reviews, please. We've got the Album Review Club on Wednesday nights live, and of course, the live streams on Friday night. Also, make sure to go over to the Dreadful Minutes and check out Rick's content on his own channel. Rick's a great visual artist. He did the Heavy Metallurgy logo for us and stuff, and has helped out a lot of folks in the community. He's an all around awesome person. So yeah, go show him some love over on his channel as well. And with that, we're going to sign off. So until next time, everybody take care. And as always, keep banging your head.